Welcome to Designing for Roomscale VR, presented by HTC. Please welcome your panelists James Iliff, Hess Barber, Steve Bowler, and moderator April Warren.
Hi everybody, how are you doing? Are you enjoying VRLA? Awesome. Welcome to our panel. Today we are going to be talking about designing for Roomscale VR. I want to thank HTC for having us all up here. I'm April Warren. I'll be your moderator. My background is in virtual production for film, and more recently getting into VR and AR creation. And I currently work at Disney Imagineering. So I'm kind of just going to go down the row. If you guys could introduce yourselves, what you do, what you're working on right now. Yeah, just basic intros. Go ahead.
Does this work? Hey, it works. Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Bowler, and my title is, I got to check it because it's new. I'm president of Cloudgate Studio. We just formed our company 3.5 months ago, and our title, Island 359, our first title is out on the show floor. Everybody swing by and play it later. We're sort of specializing in the room scale vibe space right now because we can't get enough of it. So, but yeah, we founded Cloudgate because we were so enraptured by room scale VR.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm James Iliff. I'm one of the co-founders of Servios. I'm also the creative director / project lead on Raw Data. It's a first-person action combat game. Just came out on Steam a couple weeks back.
It's breaking all kinds of records, right? On Steam?
It seems to be the case. We're pretty blown away by all that, but it's been a crazy ride. It's been fun.
Awesome. So the way I'm going to structure this, we're just going to run through a couple questions that I have for our panelists, and then towards the end, we'll open it up for a Q&A for any questions that you guys have about designing for room scale. So first off, I want to start with, what is room scale? I think people look at it and have a bunch of different definitions. Is the Oculus with a camera room scale? Is it room scale once it gets to 2 cameras with the Oculus and the touch controllers? How would you each define room scale?
Should we just go in order?
Yeah.
Or? Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what we're allowed to say with NDA with the Oculus Touch thing, but and how room scale it is. But I personally define room scale as anything bigger than standing scale because it has to scale to the volume that you're going to have in your home or your office or wherever it is that you're doing it. But anything that basically allows you to take one step outside of where you're currently standing, I think fits that definition of room scale. Just allowing you to move around and use your personal space more than just standing directly in place.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting term. It really didn't exist until the Vive came out. And it kind of gave consumers this perception that they have a certain requirement in order to have a quality VR experience in their room, and it kind of focuses the conversation around the size of the room. I actually think that's probably one of the least interesting aspects of VR, just like talking about dimensions. I think that games can be fairly compatible with almost any dimensions, depending on the locomotion method you have, the interaction systems you have. We started out doing sort of room scale style VR about 4 years ago in 2012, and we used a bunch of hacky systems to put together like Razer Hydras and PlayStation Moves on this crazy goofy skateboard helmet to kind of, it was a really early look at what was possible with VR, and we actually had a fully embodied avatar with multiple people sharing the same space. We just called it a play space at the time, and it was really whatever range the camera happened to have, that's just kind of the space that we set up for it. And then as we started developing on other systems, we realized that the real value in building an experience is, like you said, just having enough room to be able to move outside of just a standing space, but also having 360 tracking, being able to move around a fully immersive world. To us, it was always, we wanted to have the holodeck straight out of Star Trek, and to have something like that, you have something that's close to the size of a room, you can have multiple people in it, you can move around, it tracks your entire body, and you're totally immersed. And I think this, everything going on with Vive comes pretty close to that.
So you brought up some interesting things about collaboration and interacting with other people in VR, in what you just said. One of the things about room scale is it can be somewhat isolating because you're playing by yourself. I know I personally have gotten 2 Vives up and running in the same tracking space. And that's always fun because then I can see you, you can see me. Do you guys see the future I guess in the future, a world where two people are in the same physical space interacting in the digital space, or do you think we'll always be isolated into separate physical spaces?
We used to do both, and I think we have several setups back at our office that kind of play around with this. It's pretty cool having two people physically there in the same space, virtually and in reality, because all the haptics is real, right? You can actually bump into each other. You can give someone a hug. It actually feels like they're there. But in the long term, it's all going to be about multiplayer online. Honestly, having a really interesting avatar that embodies your character and being able to interact with other people in a lifelike way with body language, facial expressions based off of things like phoneme detection in the voice and the microphone, things like eye tracking or faking eye tracking just by making some assumptions about where avatars are looking. All these kinds of things can really add up to give you a wholesome experience that feels like you're actually having a sense of spatial intimacy. And even if the person's not there, in reality, it's extremely compelling. And it's the closest thing that we've ever gotten to being able to have true telepresence.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are amazing points. And but to the point of like, will it be sort of like couch co-op VR, right? Like two people sitting in the same room doing VR, or whether the question was like whether it'll be people all interacting from remote, isolated spaces. I like to always use that mantra right now of that, like, there's no hard rules with VR. Like, it can be whatever we want it to be. And I'm trying to even look at it from the perspective of, and I think this is probably why companies like Facebook got into it in the first place, like beyond games VR, because we're both doing games, and multiplayer and co-op is always what comes up for the interaction between people. But not only does this give us the holodeck, like you mentioned, that's what we nickname it, especially with the chaperone thing coming up. But more importantly, that from like a sci-fi nerd space, like this allows us to have like The Matrix, and I don't mean like the movie The Matrix. I mean like the William Gibson and Neil Stephenson Matrix.
The Neuromancer
Yes.
Matrix. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Like I can go online, and I can visit virtual spaces, and I can go into virtual shopping stores. I can take my avatar in there, and I can see what the clothes look like on me. And, thinking future, right, like 10, 20 years down the road from now, there's so many opportunities for human interaction in VR beyond what we're exploring now that, I don't even want to try and predict what it is. Like if it's couch co-op in the same volume, that's great. But I really am looking forward to the opportunity to like going out into the world and like, hey, I can go kind of maybe see what the Eiffel Tower looks like, and I can go visit Machu Picchu or whatever, or I can just go to a cool store and interact with the shopkeepers at the store who are also maybe in VR helping me out, right? I just think like I don't want to say this is what it will or won't be. It's just I love the opportunity that's there.
Yeah, we're at the dawn of the metaverse, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with the dawn of the metaverse is a big place, and we need to be able to get around in a big place. And if we're talking about room scale, let's say we're talking about the biggest Vive volume you can do, which is technically 15 by 15. Some people have stretched it bigger, we know, but let's say 15 by 15. But the world is big. How am I going to get there? What is my mechanic for moving through the giant world? What have you guys tried? What did you try that didn't work? What have you tried that did work?
It's funny we were just talking about this because both the Servios guys and Jeremy and I at CloudGate sort of stumbled on a similar solution. And I don't mind sharing where at least we got the inspiration for it from, because a guy named Chris Pruitt, who made a game called Dead Secret for Gear VR, this really killer white paper, like a long time ago, like in VR terms, it's like 6 months ago, about how to move, right? That's like an eternity.
It's ancient.
How to move people in VR, because the common thing that people keep falling back on is that you can't move the player if they're not really moving in the space. And what he really hit on, which is a really interesting way to describe it, is A, that's bull, and B, you can't accelerate a player unless they're accelerating in space. And that's the key. And so what we found is that you can get zero nausea, and the player can go wherever they want, whether they want to do it with a joystick or whether they want to do it, like we're using a gaze-based sprint system. You guys call it dash, I think, and it's point. But so long as you don't accelerate the player, and technically it is acceleration in one tick, but they can start, if they're starting at zero, and when they move at a constant rate of speed that doesn't change, their inner ear tells them that it's okay, we're not there's no inertia on our body right now, and the visual is also saying there's no inertia on our body, so your body resolves it as, this is fine. And like I said, it doesn't matter whether it's joystick or whether it's gaze-based and it's like a teleport or a sprint or a dash. Any of those things will work in any combination that you want to execute them in, so long as you don't accelerate the player. So they can't go from 0 to 2 miles an hour to 4 to 8 to 16 or whatever. It doesn't even have to be exponential. So long as it goes from 0 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour and stays at 50 and comes back to 0, you can do whatever you want. You can let the player move themselves however they want, and you shouldn't get motion sickness. There's a very small percentage of people that makes them motion sick. Yeah,
absolutely. It's got to be a constant speed, and there's a lot of different locomotion methods that people have been playing around with. I mean, in VR, it's been 30 years where people have been trying to figure out proper locomotion, and I think what it's dawning on us is that it's really just, it's completely dependent on the type of application and the type of content and the feel of your game and the pacing of your game, and different forms of teleporting work, different forms of translation work. What we've seen is about very few people get nauseous with a teleporting mechanic. We happen to use one that's more of like a dash style mechanic versus a blink style mechanic, which is with blink teleporting, you'll fade in and fade out fairly quickly, and that works for games that are a bit slower paced, more like exploration games or puzzle solving games, or any game that's not, you're trying not to die constantly. And then with more action-oriented games or horror games or things like that, the dash style kind of works really well because it transports you from point A to point B, but you're actually maintaining your spatial orientation throughout. So when you arrive at point B, you actually know exactly where you are. You have a bodily sense of where you are in space, and you can actually teleport all the way across the map and land behind an enemy and already have your sword raised right before you cut his head off. And it's almost like an acrobatic movement. It requires a lot of muscle memory and special training, but people pick it up really, really, really fast. And because they're not fading in, fading out, they don't lose any sense of their spatial orientation, and they actually they maintain everything that was going into that movement throughout the teleporting. So this actually got pretty compelling for most of our users. There's a subset of users that I agree with them. They really like the joystick locomotion / trackpad locomotion, which just does away with teleporting entirely, and you translate your position with a trackpad, excuse me, or a joystick. This causes most new users to get nauseous, but I found it to be pretty compelling. It depends on the type of game we're making, but we've played around with a lot of prototypes with it, and I think if games can support both and you can balance a game that has all these different options, that's the ideal scenario, because ultimately it comes down to user preference.
And then what do you think about, so we've teleported or we've dashed, we're in a new location. How much are you guys, in your experiences, implementing moving around my physical location versus standing still and just moving around? I feel like once you start moving around using these fast mechanics, it's hard to get people to actually move or interact in their room. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's all about the incentive structure and of course the content as well. But once you give people the ability to move around, there's a lot of micro adjustments that happen. Like in our game, it's a lot of intense combat. You have to duck behind cover, hide behind a pillar. You're reaching for a weapon, or you're activating something, or you're placing a turret, or there's all this activity that happens in your space, and then enemies come up and get right in your face. We have stealth ninja bots that come out of nowhere and they try to slice you, or you got exploder bots that blow you up and knock you halfway across the map. There's a lot of reasons to want to move around and do all these micro movements, and that's actually the fun part, really. It's all these micro movements in your personal space where your personal space is getting invaded and you're having to duck, dodge, and move around and do all these crazy tricks, and you're almost doing it without thinking. That's where it gets really exciting, and you start to experience that flow.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of similar things that you guys are doing. We had decided at one point that we wanted to try putting in natural cover things, very similar like what you guys have. But we're using like rocks and bushes and things like that. And one of our most successful tests is we made just a gray box map where we weren't using rocks, we're just using cubes, get it done quickly. And the cubes weren't good enough, so I went in and I made 1 meter high bush cover that had visibility blockers in it. so that the dinosaurs couldn't see you through the brush, right? It's one of the problems with games is that we visually can't see through it, and the AI are like, I know you're behind that bush, because their line check just goes right through it. So once I implemented that, the very first time I played it, and I was like, I bet this will work, because you perceive the animal threat as like a very real thing, even though we had never met dinosaurs. We're using audio cues, things that people recognize, that supposedly your lizard brain still recognizes, like a lion's roar is supposed to affect your lizard brain. And we found that we did it, people playtesting do it, as soon as they see a raptor go like this and look at you, everybody ducks. Everybody immediately goes, oh my God, and they drop down to the floor. And I've had situations where I've run out of ammo in our game, and I was trying to avoid, it's called an allosaur. It's like a solitary predator that's like the size of, like half the size of your house. And he's set to do like one-hit kills. One bite will completely kill you. And we had a bug in the game where I was dropping my guns on accident. We fixed it. It's not there anymore. But what this actually created was I knew where all the stuff was in the world because I put it there. And I dropped the guns, and I realized to kill this allosaur, I was going to have to get to the next gun drop. And we had already put the stealth stuff in and the visibility lines of the dinosaurs. And I'm in the basement of my house, and I'm not kidding you guys. I'm laying on the floor, like, don't see me, don't see me, don't see me. Oh my God, okay, he's looking away, I can move. And I'm like using our dash system, like looking where I'm going, and I'm like sliding through the world on the floor.
So you became a snake?
That's so awesome.
Yeah, just to try and keep out of the way of, because I was up on a hill, so he's like head height with me, so he can see me. And it was so much fun. So what we started doing, because that was crazy amounts of fun, is we're not going to encourage people to lay on the floor. I'm not saying that. But a lot of times what we're doing is we're taking the ammo crates, or we've got like throwable explosives like gas cans and propane tanks, and we always put those on the ground down here, right? We don't put them up. There's no shelves in the wild. You can't, nobody has a bookshelf where they put stuff on in the jungle. And so it sort of helps encourage people to reach down, and we found when people reach down, they'll take a step forward. And if people are sort of standing still and they're not engaging the volume that they're in, one of the ways to get them to do that is to put something on the floor. And it's bad to have it like floor height on the floor, which is why the crates are a little big. But getting somebody to reach down, like naturally, you'll start falling forward and you'll put your foot out. And you start realizing that you can translate your space that way a little bit. But mostly, we actually designed for people to play it with standing scale plus room scale. Like the game's completely playable if you don't want to move and you just want to use the movement system and sprint over the things to get it. But we are doing things where like one crate is here and the other crate's like 2 meters over here. So you could walk to it in the real world if you wanted to get to it. And in that way, we're trying to encourage people to sort of use their space a little bit more. But one of the things we've learned is you can't bank on it. You don't know how big their volume is going to be, so you can't design your game around a maximum, 4 meter by 4 meter? Is that it? The 12 feet by 12 feet space? So we try and make sure the game's flexible.
Yeah, I know the stats from Valve show that in the first few months, only 0.4% of people actually had volumes that were 4 meters by 4 meters. Mm-hmm. James, how do you handle designing for different scales of volumes that people are going to have in their house, different play areas?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, before we were doing teleporting, this was a big concern for us. So we actually implemented a lot of interesting mechanics where, like, in raw data, when you start out, you actually have to pick up an extractor and do this little interaction where you stick it in to start your data download. And that was just enough to get new players moving in the space and realizing that they can interact physically. But it would be out of reach. And a lot of times we had levers or hand scanners or like all kinds of random sci-fi things, retinal scanners, whatever. But if it's not within their range, it's just they literally can't play the game, and that's terrible. So we do a lot of things where like we would have terminals dynamically scoot up closer to you in order to reach you if necessary, depending on your chaperone size. There's a lot of other interesting tricks, like we would actually have items that would essentially gravitate towards your hand, like almost like the Force. They would just kind of get close to you. And a lot of times, if you're close enough...
I always wanted to have the Force.
Oh, yeah. The Force is awesome. Everybody's got to have the Force. And then we would also do like some animation blending where if you were really close to an object and you couldn't quite reach it, your arm would kind of reach out a little bit farther and stretch and grab it. But then once we added our dash teleporting, and we were able to expand our levels a lot and build out a more robust combat system, those kind of problems kind of melted away. We still kept the systems, and we do use them for unique moments where it's compelling and interesting. But for the most part, it feels like as long as you can teleport around a larger space, sometimes you can make micro adjustments with your teleporter if necessary, but there's no cases that we've run into anymore, any edge cases where the player can't reach anything.
Cool. So one thing I want to talk to you guys about as fellow developers, I know a lot of times how many of you out there are developers? Can you raise your hand? Awesome. So I don't know about you guys, but when I'm developing, a lot of times, there's glitches in the game, there's bad things happening to frame rate that I'm checking out, and sometimes you can't tell unless you put the headset on yourself and you're in there, and then your brain goes, ugh! How are you guys dealing with that? Are you with checking frame rates ahead of time, protecting yourself and your fellow developers? Obviously we're making it optimized once we ship it, but when you're in that development phase, what are you doing?
I take a lot of ibuprofen. I mean, a lot. There's times when frame rates butter, like we call it, and it's 90 frames per second, and then there's times where sometimes early on I had to do VR dev on like a nice beefy gaming laptop that only had a mobile 970 card in it, and that will only get you to 75 frames per second. And man, that was rough. But a lot of times what we're doing is we swap out cards. We have 970 cards, like min spec cards, and we run those to do perf tests. And then when we have to shoot a trailer, or we want to prototype new features that we're worried will make us sick, is we put the 1080 cards in, and then we go with the beefy stuff until we get it working, and then we have to step back and say, now we're spoiled, let's put the 970s in and let's see if we can take it. And oh God, no, give me the ibuprofen back, and then we have to dial back all of our settings and put in all these scaling sliders and everything so that we can make sure that we launch the game with min spec and let players bump up the settings. And Unreal does something nice. I noticed that we actually are using almost the same thing when I was playing Survio. So I was like, hey,
nice.
Their settings menu is using the Unreal settings like we are.
Yeah.
That Unreal has made it pretty easy through blueprints and everything for devs to access. So we kind of set things to min spec, and then if players want to bump it up, they can.
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much sums it up. I mean, thankfully we have a really gracious QA team that's willing to be the guinea pigs. I've had my fair share of being guinea pigs with like early VR headsets and doing all kinds of crazy stuff and messing up my eyeballs for a short period of time. But eventually you get over it, and that's kind of part of the whole thing.
Cool. So along the developer lines, a lot of the people out there, their first exposure to VR, and a lot of their only exposure at this point are Google Cardboard, Gear VR, Unofficial Cardboard, that type of experience, the Viewmaster. What do you see? How do we get those people excited about Roomscale? How do we get them invested and wanting to spend the amount of money that it takes? Because it's a big jump. And we've got game enthusiasts who are buying in, but how do we increase that number?
That's a really great question. I think it depends on the user, and if they're a hardcore gamer or if they like highly interactive experiences. I think most people who try Gear VR or Google Cardboard are interested and amenable to ramping it up and going more of a high-end experience with HTC Vive and Steam VR. I'm curious to see how that channel is going to get built out, and there's a number of ways you could do it. I mean, you could do 360 video advertisements of a Roomscale HTC Vive game in a mobile headset. And that could be one way of showing off what the experience might be like, even though it's non-interactive at the time. And potentially they could click through and go to the Steam store and learn more about the product. There's a number of other ways of doing it. I mean, I'm sure in the future there's going to be cross-platform communication. I'm sure that it'd be really interesting to be able to go in and spectate like a Roomscale game as a Google Cardboard user. Because it's taking advantage of what the smaller mobile headsets have to offer, where I can rotate my head and I can have some interactivity with a gamepad, but I could zoom around and fly around and observe matches. I think what Valve has done with the Dota experience, like viewing and streaming in VR, is absolutely fascinating, and it's when I tried it, it completely blew my mind. It was a breakthrough experience where for the first time we can actually get up close and personal inside a three-dimensional environment and spatially experience the heroes. And that's something that even the players who've been doing it for years never have had that up close and personal experience. And so that's kind of where it's headed. So if you can have that spectating style experience on a wider range of devices, that would perhaps be one ticket to getting users to go up the chain to more high-end VR.
Yeah, I think this might be the one time we're going to disagree slightly, is that I used to be, before I got into VR, we all heard the debates, and I was like, oh, mobile VR is going to kill because they've got the installed base. And everybody's going to get into VR as a gateway drug through, sorry to use the term, through mobile VR, like Gear VR, Cardboard, whatever. And then I actually tried Cardboard, and I hated it. It was terrible, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to diss any competitor platforms, but it's just not a good ambassador to VR, because what we found out is that if the experience is even remotely not 100% comfortable, people reject it. And the premium VR stuff that's out there with Oculus tracking and with Vive tracking is so solid, and if we're good developers and we're doing our job, which is being good ambassadors to VR, and making sure frame rate is perfect and tracking is perfect and we don't do anything to make them sick, we have a 100% attach rate. If you try it, you want to buy it, right? Because the experience is just so unlike anything we've ever had before, and it's incredible. So part of it is on us, right, to be really good ambassadors, to make sure everything we put out, it meets that quality bar, so that everybody who tries it goes, that was incredible, I need to know more. And the other part of it is I do really feel that premium VR, that this level of Oculus, Vive, and probably PlayStation VR tracking is going to be the minimum publicly acceptable bar for VR for mass adoption, right? And I always say that VR is something that you can't really get interested in until you've done it. It's not something that you can watch a video of and understand what it's like until you've actually been immersed in the matrix. So the best way to do it is, again, be good ambassadors to the product and the community, but also do events like this and really open them up to the public. Have Vives at Best Buy or Vives at whatever consumer electronics store you have. Make it as open and available to people to demo as possible, because as soon as people try it, they want it.
And that brings up testing and how much, and getting users into your experience. We're doing VR every day. How early do you bring in testers to test out your experiences, to try it out, to inform where you're going?
Oh, I'd say constantly. I mean, when we are doing early prototyping, we're constantly doing usability testing and QA testing. So it's just part of our pipeline.
Yeah, same. It's we're very small. We're startup small, and so our QA team right now is the friends and family program. Hey, come over for some beers, bring your kids. We'll put them in and see if anybody gets sick, and hopefully they have a good time.
If you give them beers, they might.
Yeah, well, I don't tell them about the sick part, and the kids definitely don't get the beer. Let me just be very clear about that, unless they're from Europe. That's allowed, I heard. Anyway, so, but also what we do is we also have the peer developer community in VR has been amazing. That it's we've never met, but I feel like we're friends because we're kind of like brothers in trenches right now, right? Yeah. That we've gotten I think they're happy with me telling the story. The Northways, the families, Colin and Sarah, who make fantastic contraption, they originally loved the Brookhaven experiment demo that Jeremy and I made, and they wrote us to say how great they thought it was, and hey, we want to see you guys take it in this direction, and they loved it. So I just tried to stay in touch with them, and now that we've started our own company, they were immediately pinging me on Twitter. They were, when we announced it, we want it, and I'm like, you're absolutely getting it. And so we send them builds and keys, and we get this really great grandfathers of VR level of dev experience who break it down and talk about what's working for them and what's not working for them. And the VR community is really, I feel like we're out to help each other more than compete with each other, because it's such a young industry right now. And that's been a big part of our QA program, is getting peer feedback from other developers is really important. And then you still have to focus test it and put people who've never even tried VR in it and see if they fumble with it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's really nothing more important than having a really hungry community, because getting just a constant onslaught of detailed feedback and parsing it and seeing what bubbles up to the top. It's really like it's like having a giant team that's helping you along the way, and in a way it's awesome, especially like doing stuff like early access, like being able to have your own customers feel like an extension of your team. And at the same time, like I totally agree, like having a variety of users try out the experience is so vital. Like having noobs to VR try something out, and having the veterans try it out, even different sizes and shapes of people, short people, tall people, people with big hands, people with small hands, you know, it's different for everybody. It really is. And so someone might feel great, but someone else might feel absolutely awful if we don't try to calibrate for all these different options.
Yeah, we were talking about different sizes of people. I would even recommend people who are, I think the term now is differentially abled, try VR if you can. We have a friend of ours who has a really, really bad back problem, and they were running through our tutorial, and part of our tutorial is learning to drop, and we said drop the gun, and they dropped the gun on the floor, and then the tutorial says now pick it back up, and they were like, are you serious? Because they can't reach down to the floor. No. So for at least the tutorial part of it, that informed us, and we put a volume in there that will catch drops on the floor and put them back up on the table, because we're not teaching you to bend over. We're teaching you how to drop and pick things up, and that wasn't necessarily part of the program. And we wouldn't have learned that until we got somebody who couldn't bend over to try the game.
Yeah,
So.
it can be really debilitating at that point. We actually happen to have a few folks in the office who have back issues too, and it's important to try to cater to everyone who has those different types of issues in different contexts. It's just there's a lot of edge cases to try to keep in mind. We actually had all of our weapons just kind of float up after like a second or so. If you drop it, it'll just float up and you can grab it, or it'll just teleport right back to your hip so you can pull out your gun and reload, or it goes right back to your back, or a different body loadout. But again, that totally is dependent on the type of game. If it's a slower paced game that's about building more atmospheric immersion, and you want that physical interaction, maybe you do want it to be the full physical movement. But in other games where it's the focus is more about a fast-paced action, we had to make a lot of interesting sacrifices in order to make the user experience have a sense of flow and not get caught up in like the little nitty-gritty details.
So we are running out of time, so let's go ahead and open it up to the audience for any questions that you guys might have. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi there, Greg Panos here. You're talking about Roomscale VR. Beyond an interesting thing I saw at SIGGRAPH is furniture that moves around by itself. So I can envision a place with a hardwood floor where you snap a finger and you say, I'm ready for my Roomscale VR, and all the furniture goes dancing over into a corner or a closet. That would be kind of a neat idea. But in any case, if you go beyond...
Is it like a mixed reality kind of room where you'd have props and things like a set?
No, it's like a regular living room,
okay.
Except the furniture can move around and go places and do things. And
That's
I couldn't think of a better reason than to just, hey guys, get out of the way. I'm going to do my thing. But beyond Roomscale VR, they're starting to show backpacks that are tetherless. And if people start acquiring tetherless and their own visors, they certainly won't have to be sharing them, and they can collaborate, and they can walk around or move around in other spaces. Beyond Roomscale VR is what garage scale and warehouse scale and aircraft hangar scale VR. How are you thinking extrapolating out beyond just closed installations like the Void and these other guys out of Australia that are putting their own solutions together, where the public can, at a minimal cost, acquire just the equipment they require to participate in these kinds of rave-like VR experiences that are very large that come together like last minute? I could see like that being a real big thing in the future.
So, sorry to jump in. That's actually it's a cool concept. And while I am a huge fan of the backpack VR stuff, it's really something that's going to mostly only succeed in like rental installations like the Void, and really big, just like destination VR things. I'm going to go to the facility and I'm going to play with their backpack equipment. Because one, it's going to raise the cost up really high for consumers. And two, what I think a lot of folks don't understand, because it's undeniably like a kick-ass concept, and I wish I had one. But the problem with it is that, like, I used to develop Kinect games years ago, and the Kinect said, hey, you just need to have 6 feet between the TV and your couch for the minimum volume. That small of a space was a big issue even for most Americans, right? That most apartments, people who had Xboxes and stuff just didn't have that volume to reach between the front of the TV to the front of their couch. And Microsoft wanted you to have 12 feet. That was the recommended volume, and 6 feet was okay, well, that's the minimum volume, and that was still a problem. And it's a big reason why it didn't take off in like Japan or China or anywhere else in the world, because the world market doesn't have anywhere near that scale space. So like Roomscale is amazing at 4 meters by 4 meters, but like I don't have a space big enough in my house for that. Even if I went into the garage, I'd have to pull my cars out and I have to move some stuff, and then I'm playing in my garage, which in Chicago is terrible. So really for me, for an international distribution model, right, which is what Steam is, and even, you know, in China it's HTC Viveport, we have to design our products around a scalable room and a scalable system.
Cool. So it looks like we're actually out of time. I know there were a couple more questions. So panelists, if you are available, we can meet maybe at the back of the room and answer some more questions in person for anybody who didn't get to ask any. Apologies that we did not get to you.
Totally. Yeah,
Awesome.
happy to.
So we'll head back over there until the next panel starts and just be around to talk about any more questions that you guys have. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.